one. In fact, longer than this morning's Torah reading. And I did, we did briefly talk back and forth about perhaps shortening it, but really kind of beginning to end. There's so much there, not only related to kind of Saul and Samuel and the failure to fulfill this commandment, but also just a lot about leadership, a lot about forgiveness, a lot about kind of what are the perceptions of what God values, right? Kind of obedience versus sacrifice and gifts, and really just start to finish. There's so much there to be unpacked, or at least read along with. So thank you for taking that all on. And I do want to reflect a little bit more on these themes of Shabbat Zachor. Something, it's a little bit hard to fathom and understand that for all the traditions of memory and all the importance that memory plays in our culture and in our Jewish lives, when we have a Shabbat named Shabbat Zachor, named the Shabbat of memory, it really is a little bit difficult that it's about this kind of bearing a grudge and erasure of an entire nation. That's certainly not what we think about when we think about memory, or at least it's not what I think about when I think about memory. And it is also a little bit incongruous with only 1 week after we were celebrating Rosh Chodesh Adar, right? I have a hard time equating how this theme of really pervasive joy that goes along with Misha Nichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, whoever enters the month of Adar, their joy is multiplied, with only a week later, this commandment of vengeful annihilation. The two things don't seem to mesh all that well together. And even the heart of the commandment of Shabbat Zachor it's difficult to understand, and it can seem like the very verses that it's based on are at odds with each other. As we read just a couple minutes ago from Deuteronomy, Zachor et asher asalacha Amalek, timche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. Remember what the nation of Amalek did to you when you went out of Egypt. They surprised you on your march when you were famished and weary. So blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Do not forget. The obvious question that we wind up asking every year is, which exactly is it? Do we never forget, or do we completely erase the memory? Or is it somehow possible to do both? And the other question that I've been thinking a lot about this year, which I asked on Thursday morning for those of you who joined us for the Minyan, is what exactly is the difference between being told to remember something and being told not to forget something? What are the different possible layers of meaning that we might want to unpack there? And one of the things I was thinking about was framing this passage in similar terms that we talked about with this morning's Parshat Terumah. Thinking of this passage of Parshat Zachor as a sort of instruction manual. Do this thing exactly as I am telling you. There is no metaphorical subtext here. It is just a simple and historical commandment. And the Haftarah that my mom just read seems to support that. King Saul has a chance to literally eradicate the nation of Amalek, to fulfill this commandment in the most literal sense. He falters in the moment, and he's punished by forfeiting the royal line to David. But it turns out that throughout rabbinic history, that perhaps Amalek, in the literal national sense, and this commandment to eradicate them, was not quite as strict as the Torah makes it out to be. And perhaps there was a little bit more room for redemption than either the Torah passage or the passage from Samuel lays out. One of the sources that I came across this week that I never actually knew before is that there is a story told in two different sections of the Talmud that actually recounts descendants of Haman, who again is kind of the Amalekite that makes it throughout history. That there were stories of the descendants of Haman learning and teaching Torah in Bnei Brak. And so not just kind of not eradicating them, but actually that they got to some sort of full acceptance within kind of the most holy and dignified levels of rabbinic thought and Jewish society, which is really a pretty striking divergence from eradicate the memory of Amalek for all time. And once the ancient Talmudic rabbis kind of cracked the door to this battle with Amalek maybe not being so literal about complete eradication, some of the Hasidic masters of the 18th century kind of throw that door wide open. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev posits that the eternal struggle with Amalek is actually an internal one. That every person, Jew and non-Jew alike, has the seed within them of a potential kind of Amalek aspect. In my mind, it represents something akin to the dark side of the Force in Star Wars. That this is buried deep within our hearts. To him, with his Hasidic view that each person is a microcosm of the entire world, the decree against Amalek is truly a perpetual and unforgettable mitzvah, an exhortation to remember always to subdue that seed and to be our best selves and encourage those around us to do likewise. Another Hasidic master, Rabbi Gedalia Rabinovitz of Linitz, has a different take. The word used in the passage for what Amalek did to the people that we read this morning is asher karcha baderech. This is usually translated along the lines of they surprised you on your way, but it shares the Hebrew root of kush resh, kar, which means cold. He describes the transition that took place as Israel left Egypt and encountered Amalek as a cooling off. And I want to read this in a translation of his own words, because it's really pretty wonderful. The hearts of Israel were filled with flame when they saw the wonders the Blessed Holy One performed in bringing them forth from Egypt. The Egyptians were struck down by miracles, the 10 plagues, and the splitting of the sea. Seeing all those things that happened to our ancestors, even a brick in the wall would cry out to praise God's great name. But wicked Amalek dressed those miracles up in ordinariness, thus cooling off the intensity of Israel's faith. Then they too became forgetful of God's loving kindness. And what Rabbi Gedalia here is laying out to me is the very essence of this command not to forget. Not to forget the initial flame and passion and optimism that are the connection to the divine and that are the core of the forces for good within each and every one of us. And that makes the struggle with what Amalek is and what Amalek represents and these commandments a lot more real. Because of the famous historical special commandment to hear Parshat Zachor, to hear these verses read aloud from the Torah, this week for the first time in a while, not from within this community necessarily, but I've heard on kind of different listservs in Jewish communities, kind of laments and different kind of planning and solution regarding not being able to gather and read this passage from a physical scroll, because there is this really kind of elevated emphasis on this being a really important mitzvah to hear these words. And before spending time with some of these Hasidic sources, I was doing a little bit more eye rolling of all the things that we've missed over the last year, all the different times we haven't read from the physical Torah scroll. This is really the time when we're going to come back and say, oi, oi lanu, like this is so terrible for us. I couldn't quite buy it. But I think viewing this passage of Zachor and viewing these commandments of both remembering and not forgetting as internalized struggles with the forces of Amalek, as internalized and omnipresent kind of struggling to remember, to suppress some bad instincts and to not forget to elevate our good instincts, are really really kind of a great thing to elevate, and a great passage to be focusing on, and to be thinking about. Memory is something we do every single day, and so to bring that sense of remembering and not forgetting into our lives, into the lives of those around us, as really remembering kind of to always be striving for self-improvement, and to make the world around us a little bit of a better place each and every day.